Hey, everybody. Give a minute for people to get in here. Let's see. Since we have our. Hey, everybody. Oops. Forgot to mute that.
Oh, you're talking about the part with me in Florida and the Skittles in my foreskin. Yeah, okay. No, that was like a wordsmith there.
For our special guest. Good morning. A little early for you, Mrs. Metcalf, I know. Sherry. Mr. Glock and Swine. Misty-eyed girl. Does everybody have a good night? Thank you for noticing my skin last night, GS. It was a great compliment. I do. It's just, little hot oil treatment and some moisturizer, stuff like that. Friday, 7 cities. Oh, no. I'm about to get stingrayed. I have a spinning wheel of death. Spinning wheel. All right, we are on chapter 11 of What Have We Done? The moral injuries, let's see. You got the notification this time? Yeah, I mean, notifications get funny. I shared it out in all the places too. So I don't know. Of course, I set it up in passing. I got stuff to prep for me 2,000 subscriber stream. Thanks to all you guys sharing things out. I appreciate it. All right, we'll get started. I'm only going to do one chapter. Obviously, I've got that other stream to prepare for. You just did. There you go. I think everybody in here knows exactly where to find you on the tube, sir. There's no outsiders here yet. I'm sure there'll be. What's up, Justin? Later. This is an early stream for a lot of the people that watch my normal streams. All right. War crime. Things that certain people in here like to accuse me of. If we do not prepare them adequately, their moral failing is ours, though they are the ones left to suffer the consequences. Rebecca Johnson, Dean, U.S. Marine Corps War College. In the waning days of World War II, Private First Class John Lee and other American GIs assembled about 60 German soldiers, lined them up against a brick wall, and as the Germans stood with their hands raised in surrender, shot them down in fusillades of fire. Fusillade, sorry. Me and words, These were no ordinary Wehrmacht troops. They were fanatical Nazi SS soldiers. The Americans had just broken into the notorious death camp at Dachau where the SS served as guards. Gaping the boxcars full of corpses, the Americans were beginning to comprehend the ghastly reality that the SS had tortured, beaten, starved, mutilated, and murdered untold numbers of Jews and others. The German SS troopers were grinning and taunting the Americans. It seemed unlikely in those chaotic last days of the war that the SS men would ever be brought to real justice for the crimes they had committed. Nevertheless, gunning down surrendering soldiers was itself a war crime, at least technically a war crime, punishable by hanging. But was it immoral, unjust? John Lee was a frail and astonished 75 years old when I knocked on his door after tracking him down in a Cleveland suburb in 2001, 56 years after the incident. I was curious how he thought about his actions and whether he ever felt twinges of moral remorse. He invited me in. And after we had talked a while, he acknowledged that killing the German prisoners had been wrong. He readily acknowledged the guilt and regret of moral injury and the pain of having held his secret for so long. But for me to judge what he'd done as an exhausted, anguished 20-year-old, he said, "You had to have been there." I continue to be troubled by that reproachful remark. His admonishment that the acute moral dilemmas of war cannot be understood by outsiders, that the moral injuries of wartime should be left for the individual to bear alone. Certainly, Dachau was a morally treacherous situation for John Lee, a dilemma with no obvious right answer. One that would be familiar to veterans of other wars and, most recently, to the young Americans who fought in Afghanistan and Iraq. I think John Lee was wrong. Oof, that's a tough call, buddy. I mean, I haven't disagreed with you until then, but we'll see. I mean, dealing with it alone, I believe, as we have discussed before, that hey, Melissa, how are you doing? I believe that there's ways of ritual cleansing and being brought back into the culture as done in my culture. If you're back in Israel, that's why you have so much less PTSD in dealing with things like that, right? All right, Kittle. We must see and identify those wartime actions that clearly violate our own moral and legal standards. But we must also acknowledge the pain of those who struggle at these crossroads and make a fateful choice, whether or not we ourselves would have made the same decision, whether we would have pulled the trigger at Dachau or stood apart from our combat buddies in the moment. We must accept moral responsibility for the decisions of those we send to war on our behalf. Otherwise, like John Lee, they do bear moral injuries alone. What up, Jimbo? Y'all still fighting for your sand? How do you define morality in wartime? More precisely, how do these young Americans we send to war sort through the emotional and legal thickets in the crashing immediacy of battle? How can they think clearly about moral issues that remain muddied despite debates by learned theologians, legal scholars, and philosophers down through the ages? Remember, this has been talked about all the way since the Battle of Marathon. Sanctified killing or murder. When the deadly erupting blast of an IED has just torn off the legs of your best buddy and steel fragments slice through his brain, and you find cowering in a gully an unarmed teenager holding one end of the detonating wire, should you kill him? Or detain him for questioning that may result in his release? For the rest of your life, to whose version of morality do you answer? Your own? Your dead buddies? The version understood by the battalion commander? The one presented to a court-martial jury? The morality of the God who let your buddy die? Oh, and I know there was a question asked about why I won't write God. This was somewhere else on another channel. We cannot create an idol, and writing the name of God is creating an idol. We can say the name of God. We can say Hashem. So there. That'll answer that question. And I appreciate your person in the chat looking that up for you and presenting that to you. You just scrolled through it really quick. Let's see. The moral beliefs of your buddy's widow. If you refrained from shooting at the SS guards at Dachau and they went free, would that weigh on you for the rest of your life? If any of the confusing but common moral crossroads in the war, how should our troops avoid sustaining a moral wound in cases where moral choice can lead to a war crime? Who should bear the weight of a legal judgment and the pain of the moral injury? Without the Army Corps putting sand back, the Gulf of America washes up in their backyards. They want 100% cooperation with everyone's signature to sign our property to them. Nope. I have I have some signatures on something called the Constitution. That's pretty jacked up, Jimbo. The U.S. military has spent years and fortunes perfecting the most realistic and thorough combat training in the world. But in preparing young Americans for war, it has failed in one glaring aspect. Those we send to war are never trained to anticipate the moral quandaries of killing that they will face. They are given no opportunity or encouragement to think about or to discuss what makes some killings moral and others a sin or even illegal. We send them into a situation that puts me in mind of jungle warfare training in Panama. Go Panama. Woohoo. Shout out to the embassy down there. They treat you well. Where I once accompanied an army platoon on a daytime patrol. The dense, tangled jungle is notorious for spookily swallowing whole groups of men. Sure enough, 50 meters into the green murk The vegetation was so thick, I lost sight of the soldiers directly ahead. 50 meters more, and the path disappeared in the darkening gloom, and we stepped thigh high into thigh high deep water. Compass needles swung uselessly. Then the radios went dead. In a very real sense, men and women go unarmed into the moral swamp of war, which many of them return bearing lifelong injury. Often you can get lost in what seems a simple binary choice: kill the guilty Germans or let them go without penalty, while the skeletal death camp survivors howl from behind the fences. Yeah, even like Navy credit kills me on the call bombing. They just want you to they got a new program where that you can just refinance or something uh with no charges or anything at the lower interest rate. I talked to them, but no thanks. Let's see. Da-da-da. It may be more complex choice between two evils: kill to protect yourself and your buddies and to accomplish the mission, and risk a life sentence for murder, or do nothing and jeopardize the lives of your buddy, those whom you love the most and whom you depend for your life. And what's being missed here is, oh God. So the third part of this, or fourth part, wherever he's at, is like the kid in the ditch, right? Coward, hands up, cower down, just detonating an IED. You let him go, he gets released because he gave you some information. Then he detonates and kills more people. Um, just put that out there. And then are you legally responsible for those deaths? Let's see. That was the choice a young American made in our most recent wars, a choice that haunts him years after he left the war. It was a choice he made deliberately, one that he still feels was morally and ethically correct. Yet it was a choice for which he would which he would be held liable to a murder charge and perhaps a life sentence were his actions more widely known by the authorities. Hot dang, man. Um, yeah, sweet Melissa, it's all good. Not bothering me. Um, I thank goodness for Georgia's veterans laws to where I'm exempt from property taxes. The person I'll call John Doe to allow me to tell the story if I protected his identity. I want the story told, he said, so that people know. Terrible things happen in wartime. Terrible things are done by bad people and by good people making choices that might cause us to shudder. Here at home, we have constructed an image of war in which its vileness is airbrushed away. We insist that we act on a higher moral plane than the enemy. We don't shoot prisoners. Marines who are caught urinating on an enemy corpse are punished. To a large extent, the conviction that we hold the moral high ground in a war is true, often obtained at high cost. Jim Gant, the former Special Forces officer, we talked about him. He was the one that was always banging on the table and jumping up. Told me of a desperate battle in eastern Afghanistan, Tech Valley, one of the most brutal firefights I've ever been into. We were taking gunfire on entry into this compound. We were exchanging gunfire from, like here to there, he said, gesturing at the 10-foot distance from my dining room table into the kitchen. 2 women were shot. Who shot them? I don't know. But in this gunfire between these fucking Al-Qaeda guys and us, these women and a child ran between us and a Special Forces trooper named Scott Groves, about 6'3", 240 pounds, put his weapon system down as gunfire is exchanging, picked up the small child, turned his back to the gunfire, crashed into this door, put the baby on the floor, turned around and came back out. And here, Gant mimicked raising a weapon, gun up, how to explain the impulse to save the baby's life at the peril of his own. Hey, Richard. Gant sighed and blinked. Where do you get a guy like that? I knew a helicopter gunship pilot on a combined air-ground operation hovering over a medical clinic that had been seized by militants in Afghan's Paktika province. Ground troops were waiting for him to fire a missile into the building and destroy the Taliban. But the pilot and ground commanders couldn't be certain that there were no civilian hostages inside. In a missile strike, they would be killed along with the Taliban. Instead, a decision was made for the American soldiers to storm the building. As the lead trooper rushed into a hallway, he was killed in a fusillade of enemy fire. His buddies pulled the body outside and continued the assault. Eventually, the insurgents were killed and the building secured. There had been no civilians present. We accept such risks to take the morally higher ground. We do not bomb mosques. Risking the lives of civilians is wrong. We instruct military recruits on the rules and insist that our servicemen and women act with unrestrained moral integrity. From afar, the moral choices we ourselves would make in their situations seem clear and uncomplicated, perhaps even obvious. Shooting surrendering prisoners is wrong. In reality, of course, those decisions are more complicated. The right choice, less obvious. It would be morally repugnant if the SS guard escaped justice, or perhaps there is no right choice. Yet, for the reasons of military hierarchy, responsibility for making these choices almost always falls on the most junior soldiers of the working class military. Most people, like 20-year-old World War II infantryman John Lee, in those frightened moments when the choice hangs in the balance, higher authority is usually too distant, too busy, or simply disinclined to help. These intimate battlefield decisions about killing do not fall to the ranking officers on the other end of the radio miles away, or worse, circling high overhead in a command helicopter. Nor are those decisions the burden of the distant generals who guide the course of the war. Politicians in Congress and the White House who authorize or fund the war and cheer from the sidelines, likewise, are excused from that responsibility. And it never falls on the military legal system, who would judge and perhaps condemn John Lee and others for what would be determined in retrospect, without context, the wrong choice. Nor do those of us at home have to scramble to find the line that divides just killing in wartime from murder. We send young Americans into the moral jungle of war while we absent ourselves from those awful calculations. Hey, Wally, how you doing? Everybody, go join Wally. I'll link his page as soon as I can. Mrs. Metcalf, can you link his channel, please? The Wally Prather. You can find it if you just type in the Wally Prather something. He's getting close. He is a font of knowledge. Even if he is a Marine, he ate those. Yeah, just link that, Mrs. Metcalf, the Where's Wally podcast. He ate some of those high in vitamin crayons. I forgot I have a mod here. Let's see. But like the Roman spectators who passed verdicts on gladiatorial contests from the upper tiers of the amphitheater, we seem quick to judge how our troops have behaved. If they come home silent but uneasy about the choices they've made, we avert our attention, or we simply thank them for their service and move on. Yeah. Got to remember, I taught Marines for a minute. To place someone in that circumstance in which a momentous moral choice demands to be made is to expose them to a lasting sense of betrayal by higher authorities who didn't have to make the decision, to a lifetime of having to keep a secret, or of bitterness at being judged, guilt perhaps for having violated the rules, shame for taking a life in an act that could be murder. In short, a deep moral injury. All right, man. Are we still doing if it's that same battle that we had the video of y'all's buddy, that was some nutty fighting, and yeah, insane. And we need to do that Mars thing too. We're gonna do that tomorrow. Sorry, we'll text or call later. This is why the ancients devised complex rituals of cleansing and forgiveness for their returning warriors. remember we talked about even at Marathon when I forget what his name was, uh, suffered hysterical blindness and remained blind for the rest of his life. I don't think we ever decided, Melissa. I mean, I usually do 5, but Wally's a busy man. He's wanted all over the world. And not just getting people pregnant. But remember that the warriors would come back to camp at night. They would have ritualistic crying and burn their sorrows in the fires and then go back to killing the next day. We have in the Hebrew Bible rules and rituals for warriors returning from battle that you spend 7 days out doing ritual cleansing. You come back to the to your neighborhood, if you will, and you are welcome back into the society. The society holy helps you reintegrate, and that is why the rates of PTSD, anxiety, moral injury, whatever you want to call it, are so low in Israel. So I don't know if this is where he's going or not. Remember, the book's linked in the description. So anyway, for recognizing that the moral damage of wars was inevitable and allowing for healing of both warriors and his society to take place. Hey, Heavy D, my Iranian brother. We have abandoned that practice. Instead, we have sought to define and regulate moral practice in war by law. The U.S. military spends an enormous amount of time and effort trying to ensure that it conducts its military operations in strict conformance with international and domestic law. In the Army alone, 4,600 lawyers are assigned as staff judge advocates. Military lawyers are called JAGs for short because they are assigned to the Judge Advocate General's Corps. Senior JAGs I have known work at the top levels of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. What people making fun of your people? I never make fun of the Iranian people, buddy. You know I love you guys. Let's see. Highest levels of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Oh. We make fun of everybody over at Hill Pirate. I'm not sure what that. On the habitual line crosser. Yeah, but that was funny. Oh man, I'm like, what? I don't want to offend Heavy D. Iron Sheik. And in places like headquarters of the Joint Special Operations Command, the highly classified operations center of the U.S. Special Missions Forces. What? There's no such thing. Less senior JAGs work at almost every staff level in the military, including the tactical operations centers of the warfighting units. When the 2nd Brigade of the 82nd Airborne Division made a mass jump at night not long ago, a slim 37-year-old woman in full battle gear, wearing dark frame glasses and a ponytail tucked under her helmet, jumped with them. Major Megan Wakefield, paratrooper, lawyer, staff judge advocate. I have many times watched JAGs like Major Wakefield advise battalion staffs on how to shape a planned operation so that it falls within the narrow and specific laws of war. I have seen them advise against a proposed attack because it would unnecessarily expose civilians to harm, or because using airstrikes to soften up the target area would be a use of force disproportionate to expected military benefit of that operation. Every time I pulled the trigger on a mission, we had to go through the collateral damage process. It wasn't like I was out there John Wicking that shit. Just to be clear, for those of you who are listening that think I just went out there and did whatever I wanted to do. Let's see. Their judgments are sometimes met with groans of frustration and then grudging respect from warfighters. But I've also seen a general overrule his JAG when he felt military necessity trumped the law. Which, when military necessity trumps the law and the general overrides it, that is enshrined in law as well. So therefore, thank you, Freddie. I appreciate it. Let's see. So that's enshrined in law as well. So. The laws of war are a loose accumulation of treaties, declarations, precedents, and understandings of how war is to be declared, conducted, and concluded. They represent an earnest international effort over more than a century to make war less brutal, more humane, and at least one extreme case, downright illegal. The U.S. military historically has issued its own set of rules for war, including George Washington's 5 rules for honorable war. Don't abuse prisoners. And President Lincoln's 1863 General Order 100. The unarmed citizen is to be spared. Today, the laws of war include the Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907, which, among other prohibitions, outlawed the practice of dropping bombs from a balloon and any other new methods of air warfare. 1899 to 1907. A lot of times those balloons were unmanned. It was pretty cool. Yeah, they also had cameras on them. They had just freaking long ropes and shit. That part of the world, we are the only American loving and Israeli loving people. Yeah. People don't understand that in all parts of most parts of the world, I will say that the Iranian people are held hostage by their government. And every time they've tried to revolt, they've been put down, unfortunately, brutally. Yeah, I was watching a comedy show in Israel. Sorry for jumping off subject, but um, he the comedian was talking to the audience members, and there was an Iranian girl there with her German boyfriend. And he's like, "Oh, great, two enemies." So I don't know. It was just funny. No, you're good. I like talking about the region, and yes, Iran is a beautiful place. I wish it would be open so so people could enjoy it. A more comprehensive effort came with the Geneva Conventions. Shout out Poland and Canada, y'all, of 1949. This assemblage of treaties and agreements was amended as recently as 2007, when its overseeing body, the International Committee of the Red Cross, ruled that individuals wearing the Israeli Red Shield, as well as those wearing a Red Cross or Red Crescent, are protected as medical or religious persons involved in humanitarian work. Anyone engaged in fighting while wearing one of these symbols is guilty under the Geneva Conventions of Perfidy. Collectively, the laws of war have prohibited the use of exploding bullets, 1868. Distinguished between combatants and civilians, 1907. And banned chemical, 1899, and biological, 1925, weapons and landmines, 1998. By the way, we're not signatories of that. We said fuck you to Geneva and the landmines. I'm not sure which other ones we've said no to, but we are not signatories on those because we say we can use anything we want. While these agreements are still on the books, others have faded in memory and usefulness. In 1928, diplomats of the United States, France, and Germany solemnly affixed their signatures on an agreement never to go to war. The Kellogg, yes, that Kellogg, shout out Raisin Bran and them, Briand Pact was ratified soon after by most other nations, even if they rearmed and slid toward World War II. This pact technically is still in force. Barbados was the most recent signatory in 1971. Woodrow, space is not the Earth, so they cannot be included in conventions or treaties. Lasers are in their own orbit, if you will. Stupid dad joke of the moment. On the books or not, each of these well-intentioned, ambitious, and admonitions about behavior in wartime had been broken by the opening of the 21st century. I have, Richard. I love Haifa, by the way. Also, love the temple in Istanbul. Let's see. Space and time, y'all. What's up? Let's see. Although some internationalists argue they remain important safeguards against the mistreatment of prisoners and non combatants, as long as you don't touch our boats or our airboats. The Pentagon officially and formally insists that its personnel adhere to the laws of war. But any expectation now that all warring parties will abide by these rules seems dangerously naive. They were, after all, designed for an era where uniformed armies fought pitched battles face to face and declared wars over terrain designated as a war zone. None of those conditions was met in either Iraq or Afghanistan. Instead, American troops faced off against insurgents who shunned uniforms and, for the most part, avoided pitched battles, who nullified the concept of fixed war zones and by flowing freely across borders between Pakistan and Afghanistan. For instance, and from Syria and Iran in and out of Iraq. The United States, for its part, conducted airstrikes with bombers and missiles firing from drones on alleged terrorists in Yemen, Pakistan, and Somalia, stretching the original battle zones and the authorizations for the wars. Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople. Been a long time gone. Constantinople. It's a Turkish delight on a moonlit night. Thank you, Misty Eyed Girl. Long live They Might Be Giants. Even the term combatant used in the Geneva Convention now gives off an odor of ancient mildew. Man, what a descriptive term. What's up, East Coast? Is a kid who is hired to dig a hole for a deadly IED a combatant? What about the farmer driving a battered pickup truck piled with bags of ammonium nitrate from Pakistan into eastern Afghanistan? Material that could be used for fertilizer or suicide bomb. How about the unarmed civilian idling outside the gate of a U.S. Marine outpost in Iraq, in Iraq's Anbar province, who signals to unseen assailants every time an American foot patrol heads out? The Geneva Conventions thoughtfully crafted rules for treating and ultimately releasing prisoners didn't seem to apply either in 2001. In 2001, the administration of, like George, he's all right. That messed me up, Johnny boy. Thanks. Lost my pace. Now I'm not going to be able to find my waypoint. George Bush famously declared that detainees and prisoners in its war on terror were unlawful combatants. So this was about the time, just after this, he also declared war on the term narco terrorists started being thrown around right after the Patriot Act, so he could also get cartel members. Y'all want to ask me how that worked out? Uh, Shout out to the FARC and them. Um, it is thus avoided. It thus avoided having to accord them the legal rights and protections of prisoners dictated by the Geneva Conventions. Although the Bush White House promised to treat its prisoners humanely as if they were legitimate POWs. In the old days, that meant that prisoners of war were to be held under humane conditions until the end of hostilities and then released. In the unending war on terror, however, there is no end of hostilities. In January 2002, I stood outside the then temporary detainee facility at Bagram Air Base, shout out Bagram, in Afghanistan. Chatting about the ultimate fate of the prisoners with the U.S. military police officer in charge. Hefe, was that you? Under the terms set by Bush, I wondered how could they ever be released in a way that is both safe and humane. His shrug was eloquent, and the question stands unanswered today, as does the detention center in the new facility at Bagram, still full of prisoners. Well, not now. I mean, we're post disgusting pullout. After 2014, when the Islamist militants began executing prisoners in Iraq and beheading and burning alive hostages, watching that shit is a horrible thing. In Syria, it seemed unlikely that future conflicts would see a return to a humane aspirations of generations past. Nevertheless, in 2015, the Defense Department gamely released 1,176-page law of war manual detailing the legally permissible battlefield behavior for U.S. troops. For those of us who served, how much attention are we going to pay to an 1,176-page book when you're fighting? Hey, Peace Dynamo. It's a little foggy down here. Be safe driving. Let's see. Seeming to ignore the insurgencies of Iraq and Afghanistan that took the lives of more than 5,000 Americans. The Pentagon's official rules demand that honor forbids resort to means, expedients, or conduct that would constitute a breach of trust with the enemy, and combatants must take certain measures to distinguish themselves from civilian population. And in a section that strains credulity, the manual advises that adherence to these laws by Americans in combat can encourage an adversary also to comply with those law of war rules. So we're just expecting them to adhere to the same 1,176 page laws of wars that we're, let's see. Might bump the, I was like, what? That's the pups. 1,176 pages is a lot. Maybe half. I was already out of the game by then until recently. Fucking drones. I had to go to Bath for meetings all the time, but I just flew from um, Kabul to Bath. It's the only time I didn't drive somewhere. You doxed yourself. Did you? Okay, you reported yourself. Good. At least you did that. But the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan required more explicit rules to enforce moral behavior. And deploying troops were expected to comply with the rules of engagement. The intent was to embrace the evolving strategy of counterinsurgency, in which the main effort was not to destroy the enemy, but to protect the civilian population. Thus, the Roe sought, for instance, to curtail the accidental killing or wounding of civilians. A faint echo of the Hearts and Minds campaign of the Vietnam War. But the effect of that Roe in Vietnam, as in Iraq and Afghanistan, often was to push decision making down to the lowest level, the individual trigger puller. The rules were easy to apply to real world situations. For instance, the Roe for American troops in Iraq and Afghanistan insisted that force could be used against a potential or possible enemy only if he or she threatened an imminent use of force. As the 2005 Standing Roe put it, the determination of whether the use of force against U.S. forces is imminent will be based on an assessment of all facts and circumstances known to U.S. forces at the time and may be made at any level. Imminent does not necessarily mean immediate or instantaneous. Generally to specific, you can do one thing, everything in my channel, but you will not come in here and use him as sword and shield and cudgel. I know what happened with Jimbo and Izzy, and you are fucking wrong. East Coast, Hillary worked for somebody. I'll leave it at that. Y'all always forget that. Y'all think she's some evil overlord. But she worked for somebody. Let's see. Imagine a 20-year-old Army infantry squad leader pinned down after an ambush in a palm grove outside of Baghdad. I love those palm groves. With enemy fire coming at his guys from three sides, trying to figure this one out. Imminent use of force, check. But there's more. He whips out his copy of the Standing Roe and reads, damn, I never whipped out my row. The use of force in self-defense should be sufficient to respond decisively to hostile acts or demonstrations of hostile intent. Such use of force may exceed the means and intensity of the hostile act or hostile intent, but the nature, duration, and scope of force used should not exceed what is required. But see, Todd, I don't even block you when you do vile and disgusting shit on my page. Ooh, all right. The concept of proportionality in self-defense should not be confused with attempts to minimize collateral damage during offensive operations. Exactly. He never met the burden. But that's okay, Todd. Fuck. Okay, collateral damage during offensive operations. Really? You can imagine our squad leader frozen in indecision, knowing with certainty that his interpretation of this language will be different from the interpretation of a senior officer and lawyer twice his age in a solemn court martial proceeding back at Fort Riley. And you can imagine his decision as insurgents close in. Screw the rules, kill the fuckers. Anybody disagree? These standing row were usually supplemented by the tactical row issued by the combator. Grunts carried them on laminated cards, often tucked inside their helmets. These rows spell out, for instance, the escalation of force steps that must be taken before a soldier should open fire on a vehicle approaching a checkpoint. Such rules undoubtedly save civilian lives, but the rules sometimes were impossible to follow because the approaching vehicle would be moving too fast, or the driver might be confused in poor visibility, or as in the Jake Sexton incident was horrible. It was God kills me. A car full of civilians simply didn't stop for reasons no one could figure out at the time or later on. By the time Charlie 16 got to Marja, Afghanistan in early 2010, so many different sets of row had been issued that Marines had a difficult time figuring out which ones applied. I have a few different row cards somewhere. Let's see. Some of the Marines were carrying row cards from the Battle of Fallujah 5 years earlier. Others had different row cards from the battalion's 2008 operations in Garmsir. And others had been issued new row cards. All of them were slightly different. Yeah, that you're absolutely right, GJM. If whoever's listening, I pulled up a chat by GJM. It says G2. I struggle with the fact that governments don't care what we are exposed to, all under their watch. They'll fake support, but don't care. Todd, you can call me a queer on here. We already know you say it. You can say queer. Go ahead. I know there's other words you want to say with a hard R too. It's okay. We got you. In the collision between the official rules and the reality of war moral injury was widespread. After Smitty and Angus were killed by IEDs on January 24th, the Marines probing into Taliban held neighborhoods in Marja were battered by so many IEDs, 12 in one 4-hour period, that they were ordered to walk behind tanks equipped with anti-mine rollers. And they were told that anyone out ahead of them could be considered hostile. Anyone. Most toddlers do. Let's see. That was the word from our commanders sitting back in the bulletproof MRAPs, the armored trucks. Chuck Newton told me. Then I guess somebody thought that might not look too good. So it was, well, not quite anybody. So there were rules, but it was up to soldiers and Marines out in the field to figure out whether or how they applied in reality, whether their actions would win a medal or a court martial and leave them scarred with a moral injury. So, thank you, Wally. So the court martial or medal. So my bronze star. This one colonel wanted me court-martialed for disobeying his orders about laying in an airfield. I had when we were doing the long range reconnaissance into Iraq, I had already laid in my airfield, had it all set up, ready to go. And he wanted to move it a couple of clicks over. And I called General Marks and countermanded him. So he was trying to go through back channels to court martial me. That's how. And then I ended up with the Bronze Star with one line for the justification. It was rather satisfying. But it wasn't a moral quandary like this. But I was in a lot of I was not in the mood after fighting from Kuwait all the way up to Najaf for a fucking colonel to come in later after I'd already been dealing with shit and tell me no. In the lexicon of military lawyers and combat commanders, there are good kills and bad kills. The deaths of SS prison guards at Dachau eventually were deemed good kills. Would a certain person in this chat think that the SS guards were of my heritage? I don't know. Since he's said we committed it upon ourselves and shit. Or at least not bad kills. When I tracked down John Lee in early 2001, he readily admitted the truth. Nobody's really proud of doing something like that, Lee told me. He described how he and his unit, India Company of the 3rd Battalion, 157th Infantry Regiment, had fought almost continuously for more than a year, landing at Anzio in Italy and fighting up through France and on in Germany, ordered to secure what they were told was a local prison, They scaled masonry walls to find 36 boxcars, 36 people, of rotting corpses, inmates who'd been starved. It was overcast and chilly, Lee remembered as he and others crept forward beneath the tall pines, finding more stacks of bodies and atrocities of which the same soldiers could not speak even decades later. By the time they began rounding up the prison guards, as the 32,000 gone inmates living cheered and jeered from behind the fences, the men of India Company were boiling mad, half out of our minds, one soldier said later. Lee told me, I looked at the bodies as we went past. Their open eyes seemed to say, what took you so long? As the men walked warily deeper into the camp, somebody muttered, no prisoners. Eventually, they rounded up the Germans. As Lee remembered it, there was a deathly silence. We lined up the SS guards. One of the guys cocked his machine gun. The Germans started moving, and somebody shouted, fire. In the Army investigation that ensued, several similar incidents were documented. A lieutenant had ordered 4 German soldiers in an empty boxcar and personally shot them. Another American soldier had clubbed and shot wounded SS prisoners who were still moving. Several GIs turned their backs on 2 inmates beating a German guard to death with a shovel. One of the inmates had been castrated by the German they were killing. A lengthy Army JAG investigation report went to General George Patton, the senior regional commander. No action was ever taken. Among the veterans of the 157th Regiment, it was understood that Patton threw the report in his wastebasket, tossed in the match, and barked at the investigators, get the hell out of here. But a copy survived and eventually made its way to the National Archives. Where I discovered it in a cardboard box. Nobody's really proud of doing something like that, Lee told me before he died. But he added, the Army trained you to fight. It did not train you for psychological shock. The Americans who fought in Iraq and Afghanistan similarly untrained for psychological shock also came up hard against the issue of morally and legally good kills and bad ones. In these wars, the issues often revolved around enemy insurgents who were captured and detained. After the prisoner abuse scandal at the Abu Ghraib prison in Iraq was disclosed in 2004, U.S. occupation authorities in Iraq and military command in Afghanistan became more reluctant to hold detainees in prison. The result was that sometimes soldiers suspected or had evidence that an insurgent had attacked American or Allied forces. It would be arrested and taken in for interrogation, but a few days later would be free and out on the streets again. During the Iraq War, high value enemies, senior officials of Saddam's government, for instance, were either hunted down or killed. No imminent use of force judgment was required, or captured and shipped away to the new U.S. permanent prison at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, or to secret CIA rendition sites. I'll give a hint. There's no rendition site in Washington, D.C. For dummies. 52 high-ranking former regime officials and Iraqi military officers were listed on U.S.-issued playing cards. Saddam Hussein was the ace of spades. I still have some of those. I have two that are still have the cellophane on them. Let's see. Distributed to American troops as a kill or capture most wanted list with a positive identification or PID. Anyone on the list could be killed regardless of the evidence or lack of evidence against him. Dealing with less notable enemies could be difficult. Bing West is a Marine who fought in Vietnam, served as a Pentagon official, and found a third career as a battlefield journalist living with infantrymen in Iraq and Afghanistan. He detailed the problem in his 2008 book, The Strongest Tribe, War, Politics, and the Endgame in Iraq. I hadn't read that. Low-level insurgents who'd been detained, West wrote, were routinely turned loose to choose whether they would fight again. By 2006, soldiers arresting suspected insurgents were ordered to collect the kind of evidence required of police for a U.S. court case. Despite minimal training for forensic police work, soldiers found themselves filling out arrest forms, collecting sworn affidavits from witnesses, recording the biometrics, fingerprints, digital facial photos, and iris scans. Shout out to leaving all that shit behind. Each arrest package was reviewed at battalion level, then at brigade level, and a third time at Bucca prison in southern Iraq, or at Cropper prison in Baghdad. West wrote, even so, he found that 4 out of every 5 suspects detained by soldiers at the battalion level were released. That was the work of JAGs, who were scrutinizing arrests for any irregularity or weakness that could lead to the charge that an arrest was a human rights violation. Approximately 58,000 Iraqis were imprisoned between 2003 and the end of 2006. 43,000 were released. Inevitably, soldiers and Marines fighting insurgents across deadly city neighborhoods and palm-shaded irrigation canals would encounter the same insurgents they detained a few days earlier. Yep. Army Sergeant Michael Lee later explained to Army investigators, seems like even if you do your job and take these guys to the detainee center, they just come right back. The same expletive guys shooting at you, he said, according to CNN, which obtained videotapes of the investigations. In 2007, Lee and other soldiers killed 4 Iraqis who'd been detained and released, and then opened fire on Lee's unit. Congrats, Joey. Let's see. Army prosecutors rejected their explanation that the military's arrest regulations made it nearly impossible to complete their mission with insurgents seemingly rotating in and out of detention. Kind of like the revolving door of justice, eh? Oh, this is why I stopped and breathed. This makes me ill. Lay is imprisoned in Fort Leavenworth, serving a 20-year sentence for premeditated murder and conspiracy. Sergeant John Hatley, who was in charge of the patrol, received a life sentence, later reduced to 40 years imprisonment. In Afghanistan, during the time that Nick Rudolph and Stephen Canty and others of 1-6 were fighting in Marja, in early winter of 2010, Special Forces Captain Matthew L. Goldstein, a West Point graduate, was awarded the Silver Star for heroism in combat and was later recommended for an upgrade to the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest valor award. After a Marine working in Marja with Goldstein's soldiers was nearly hit by a Taliban sniper, Goldstein had quickly organized and led an operation to find the sniper. Returning fire with an anti-tank weapon, repeatedly braving enemy fire to rescue a wounded Afghan soldier, and coordinating airstrikes. The action came days after 2 Marines working with Goldstein were killed and 3 wounded in the blast of a booby-trapped door. Marines later found a nearby building with bomb-making materials and detained an alleged bomb maker. Goldstein was convinced that if he let the bomb maker go, he would kill more Americans. According to Army investigators, Goldstein said there had been countless times when a detainee was let go and days later was shooting again at Goldstein's men. The investigators reported that Goldstein took the alleged bomb maker off the base, shot him, and burned the corpse in a trash pit. In 2014, acting on the basis of the investigation, Secretary of the Army John McHugh withdrew the Silver Star Award, stripped Goldstein of his prized Special Forces status. Goldstein did tell investigators, according to the account in the Washington Post, that he felt no remorse over the killing, that he wouldn't have been able to live with himself if the alleged bomb maker had been let go and built another bomb that killed more American service members. The following year, after a 4-year investigation, Goldstein was cleared of almost all charges and given a general discharge. Hey, Dale, how you doing, buddy? Hopefully they give you some good news, buddy. But were his actions so different from the hunter-killer teams of commandos led by Stanley McChrystal? Had a few run-ins with McChrystal was the lean Special Forces officers who eventually rose to become a 4-star general and Afghanistan war commander before being fired in 2010 by President Obama. In Iraq and Afghanistan, secret teams under McChrystal tracked and killed men accused sometimes falsely by their rivals of being dangerous insurgents. McChrystal often went with his teams, as he recounts in his memoirs, my share of the task. He and his men waged relentless body blows against insurgents, and not just against the leaders they tracked down, and killed leaders, trainers, and mortarmen in order to eliminate their skilled labor, and sought to disembowel the organization but targeted its mid-level commanders. The teams worked for a joint prioritized effects list, or JPL, that by 2009 contained more than 2,000 names of suspected insurgents. Of those, roughly 1,000 had been hunted down and killed. Hey, Lefty, I'm doing well, thank you. Whew, that was a paragraph. Good grief. So, what that doesn't say about McChrystal going out with the teams is they hated it. He would want to go and CQB with them instead of sitting outside with security. And if you're not working with the teams daily on CQB, they don't want you. They think you're going to hurt somebody. So yeah. Anytime I was with them, I was outside. I was watching remote viewing terminals, watching the situation, talking to the Preds or whoever I had on station. Let's see. Around that time, a group of American infantrymen found themselves encountering out on the street the same men they had detained, now released, and back in the fight. These were snipers, or guys digging IEDs into the paths the Americans used, or laying ambushes. Often they were military-aged mams, in GA parlance, signaling with flags or their cell phones. When the grunts would set out on patrol, soldiers or Marines would see a guy scanning them with binoculars and putting a cell phone to his ear. And 10 minutes later, they'd find mortars or command detonated IEDs exploding in their midst. Very often, these spotters would be carrying visible weapons, so they wouldn't be carrying visible weapons, so they couldn't legally be shot. Sometimes U.S. troops would be able to capture a spotter and take him into a detention center. We'd done it dozens of times, flex cuffing the guys, collecting evidence, like opening their wallet and finding stuff, said one of the infantrymen, who I'm calling John Doe. We'd take them to these these intel guys, and they'd do this movie style good cop, bad cop kind of thing. I watched them do it once. We were up there at higher headquarters to deliver something and ate hot food and crapped in half of a barrel. It was like heaven. We heard some yelling, and me and another guy went over and watched this detainee in a chair getting yelled at. We were laughing, watching this officer in perfectly clean camis. We sat there for like a couple of hours, and another guy offered the detainee a cigarette. Untied him. He was speaking English, and the guy doesn't speak English. And I said, "This is good cop, bad cop routine. It's the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen in my life." Then the bad cop comes back and ties him to the chair, starts yelling at him. I'm like, this is how it works? Why are these guys getting sent up here just to be flex cuffed? They should be dead. And then they get released with $20 American, a shower, a meal, basically like the best night of their life, courtesy of the taxpayers. after we literally find weapons and radios on these people. It got to the point where all this conversation, like nighttime conversations in the squad, was like, why don't we just kill these people? You know, it kind of leaves it up to us to be judge, jury, and executioner. Several men in the unit had been killed in the past month in IED explosions and from snipers. The kind of unnerving violence that left their buddies dead or dying and nobody to shoot back at. Inside the unit, tempers frayed at the unfairness of it all. They also were terrified that Jags would nail them for doing anything that happened without really trying to understand the situation. What's up, Wyatt? Hey, GMK. All right, peace, Dynamo. Work well. Be safe. Excuse me, sorry. The Jags were often in difficult situations themselves. They'd be told to investigate a suspicious death. A body would be found, or an Iraqi villager might complain. The Jags might look into it and think, I might have done the same thing. If the guys in the unit felt that it had been a good kill, the investigation might fizzle out with no finding. That, of course, didn't make it right, but it did happen more often than officials have acknowledged. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just like being a cop. I had to do, Jeff might be able to help me. It was, hang on. I just want to find something real quick. What's the course you have to go through for detainees? I had to go through it. Dang it, man. I have it right here. I think. Internment and resettlement and support operations. I don't know. It was through Fort Leonard Wood. So I didn't know if you knew what those two were. I had to do those so I knew how to handle them. All of that stuff. The cage kicker. I think it was part of their stuff. It was just small courses I had to go through to deal them. Heavy D, I did not have the watch hours until yesterday. The Hill Pirate PayPal's up here. Let's see. don't have much left to go. I know this has been a kind of dense subject. Yeah, I mean, Wyatt, he legitimately went through the 19 Delta course and had his papa identifier despite the number of jumps he went through the course. Can't take either of those away from him. He was still just a driver. All right. In one incident where all this came to a boil, the local police had caught a 17-year-old with his pockets full of American dollars, not currency ordinary civilians had access to, and 2 cell phones. One contained contacts known to be insurgent commanders. He'd been overseeing an IED site, waiting until a U.S. or government convoy came by when he would signal for the device to be detonated. The police, John Doe told me, wanted to kill him. They wanted our permission to smoke the guy. They were going to bum rape him and shoot him in the head. But we followed procedure. We had this guy dead to rights. Doe's unit had lost men to IED blasts, men they loved. This kid was probably responsible, but they followed the rules. While they were taking him in for interrogation, he was smiling. It's like, I got it over you. It was like, I got it over you. I think he means I got one over on you. That's what it seems like to me. That quote is discongruent to me. Incongruent, ever how the word goes. Out on a patrol a week later, we were getting shot at. We'd set up, move, get shot at. One of the guys was saying, our friend is up there on the roof waving a blanket every time we move. We were like, that's the kid we just arrested. When he came off of the roof, we grabbed him by the nape of the neck. We told him, you're going to clear a path for us through a possible IED site. We got to the edge of town so we could see our base. I grabbed him. He had this big smile on his face. I took him into this room and I said, you're done. I put him on his knees. He was smiling like, fuck you guys. I took my rifle off safe. I said, you met the wrong guys. You're not going to get away with getting my friends killed. It's over. His face changed. I pulled the trigger. I went out the door. I caught up with the patrol. Nobody said anything. Nobody did anything. No investigation was ever completed. The point of it is, he said, our road prevented us from taking care of ourselves and each other. It's an extremely illegal thing. I should be in the military prison at Fort Leavenworth right now. But sometimes you have to make decisions like I have to take a chance with my life and try to save. When you see your friends die, you're like, I can't let that happen again. It tears your brain apart. Honestly, I'd rather die than to see my buddies die or go to jail the rest of my life than see that guy I had a chance to kill one of my friends. Doe sat unseeing. There was a long silence. When things go down, he finally said, the people in charge aren't there. The people in charge who are supposed to make the decisions are hiding behind walls and behind bulletproof glass because they have a career. They're not there to get shot at. They're not there to risk their lives to help us. They're there to further their career, get a medal, and move on to the next command. take credit for our good deeds and disown our bad deeds. When I talk to Doe, I can see in his eye the pain of the decision he made, the moral injury he carries at the moment he had to choose. Both options in his mind held powerful moral consequences: kill to protect my friends, but jeopardize my freedom, or not kill and jeopardize their lives. The face of the man he killed appears in his dreams, and the potential threat of being found guilty hangs over him. The guys in his unit, the sergeants immediately above him, would understand and approve of what he did, he feels. They would see it as a good kill, but someone who didn't know us, some general who sits here in America, hears about it. I would be in jail, but I want this to be in the book. I'm not giving the specifics, but I feel it's important. It's a subject people don't want to talk about, don't want to touch. So you think I said that what sorry, I am angered about the fact that this kind of stuff doesn't get out, and I am so glad that he has done it. People don't want to touch the poo, but this is the kind of poo that needs to sit and stink up Washington, D.C. This is not a call to action. This is a disgusted retired veteran, retired intel guy. Yeah. We joke about my glowy days, but my glowy days are have given me insight. Yeah. Okay. So you think I said that what you did carried a higher morality, was more noble than if you kept turning him in. If you kept turning him in and seeing this catch and release cycle, and he kept directing attacks on your guys, even though killing him was illegal. If it hadn't been done, he said, the next day we'd have gone on patrol and the same thing had happened. And one of my best friends I ever met in my life had been shot in the face. I'd be scarred for life, and probably in a worse way than I am now. Some scars kind of toughen you. Some scars debilitate. Boy, that was an ending of a chapter, huh? It was a long chapter too. Got distracted there a little bit by somebody who thinks they're trolling. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for helping my channel grow. Thank you all for sticking with me for an hour and 45 minutes. Thank you, Glock. I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it through the Dachau story, really. Yeah. Let's see. Dale, it's all good, buddy. You had to be a pin cushion for the docs, I'm sure. Okay, she is Celine is cleaning her paws. And I don't know where Val is. He was being an insane man with his TV shows earlier, but the TV automatically cut off. Sorry, let's knock my tripod on it. you want me to label it Iranian space laser, Heavy D? But it opens up to such a greater problem, right? The politicians and the generals all sit in their ivory towers, sending people to war, talking about war. Yeah. Nah, just let you borrow it. All right, y'all. I will see everybody at 7:45 for the 2000 party. Unless a bunch of people just unsubscribe just to drop me below 2000. Probably at the end of this week, Tracita. So we're doing the Hill Pirate stuff over here to party. Well, I think we're going to do some fun stuff. I don't know if we'll address him. Maybe. Hey, East Coast Audit, did you get what I was saying about Hillary in the State Department? I just want to make sure that you got the answer you wanted. Blue Steel, good to see you, buddy. I didn't see you before. Hey, AP. Oh no, it's not a new concept, AP. It's the world over, right? Peace, GJM. That's what we're here for, GJM, is that we're all understood. Oh, I'll have you, Joey Simpson. Did it ever stop raining, man? Oh, thank you, East Coast Audit. I appreciate it. I try to be helpful. Except when I'm clowning on lol cows. All right, y'all. I appreciate y'all being here almost 2 hours. I will see you guys in a little bit. Bye.